I'm really interested in terms and conditions, and I don't think most people know what the terms and conditions are.
So when you say terms and conditions, explain to people that typical moment so they can relive it and think, I know what he's talking about.
I think it works best and most ridiculously when you try and buy something off an app store. Tiny window will pop up and it will say terms and conditions, do you agree to them? And you'll have page 1 of 312 and then a button saying accept. Empirically, what appears to happen is people tend to spend about 1.5 to 2 seconds between opening the terms and conditions and clicking the I accept button.
Say that again?
They spend between 1.5 and 2 seconds between having these documents presented to them and clicking the accept button.
Do you read the pages? Because you're like this expert and you know the pitfalls. What do you do as an individual?
I am an individual. I do exactly the same as everyone else. With probably one caveat, and the caveat would be that I minimise my risk by having little presence on the web. So I, for example, don't use Facebook, don't use Twitter.
But generally, when you say you do what everyone else does, what does everyone do?
No one scrolls through those 300 odd pages or even sends a PDF. No one's got time. They just say yes. And they presume that's okay. Broadly speaking, that kind of buyer beware model is risky. And it's risky as more and more personal information gets captured that could be used for different purposes and in different ways. So I think that we need to think much more carefully about that than we do. By analogy, last time you got a loan, what happened?
I had to fill out a lot of papers and it took a couple of weeks.
Do you remember the sheet at the front which said key facts?
Yeah, they do give you like an idiot's guide.
Yeah, we don't in these terms and conditions. So there isn't a kind of key facts of what you're agreeing to.
Like an executive summary?
Yeah, well, it's like how long, what they can and can't do with your data, what your rights of withdrawal are.
This sounds really fascinating and it sounds really important. It doesn't feel like computer science. Is this computer science or is this sort of at the kind of this interface? Or? Well,
I think the answer to that is the computer science I do. I think it is fundamentally computer science, and I think it's fundamentally computer science because of a notion that I call responsible innovation. If we're building systems and tools that capture information off people, analyse that information and make suggestions which have profound impacts on their lives, then we have to do this in the context of understanding their rights and responsibilities and engaging with them as individuals as well. So part of this is building the tools to let it happen. So we've constructed a little plugin that you can get for the Chrome browser, which will look at the terms and conditions and measure that complexity for you. There's an algorithm called SMOG, which stands for Simple Metric of Gobbledygook. That allows you to kind of get a measure of how complex that text is or how dense that text is. We were able to then map that in the UK context onto educational attainment levels. So essentially, how much education would you have to have done in order to be able to read a document that complex? The basic principle of this is that what you do is you sample the start and the beginning of a document. You look at particular measures across this. Are these long words, number of characters in a word, or small? How long sentences are, how many secondary clauses they are. So what you actually do is you develop a set of metrics which allow you to measure those, and you combine those metrics together and normalise them so that you have a measure which shows you that these are small sentences with small words, big complex sentences, large paragraphs with large words. What we found was that to be able to read the terms and conditions for, in this case, for the utilities companies, for the people who supply us all with energy, meant that you had to actually have had a tertiary level of education. So you need at least a bachelor's degree, most likely a master's or postdoctoral level of qualification. So you need this in order to be able to understand the density of that text. So that means that for large segments of the population, they haven't got a reading level that will allow them to read that text. So obviously the easy answer is, but this is all legal text and you need to be a lawyer to understand it. Well, actually, it's written in such a manner that it's just hard to follow, okay? So the second part of what we did to this was we said, well, how would people make sense of this? We mapped those then to books that they may have read. So, so for example, books like Beowulf or Gulliver's Travels, or all of these great classics that we all feel we should have read, we all have purchased, and they lie somewhere on our shelves because we got through the first 2 pages and thought, this is hard work. We matched them to those, and again, we found that was really quite surprising. So for example, Google's most recent change of terms and conditions, are equivalent in complexity to Beowulf, which very few of us have managed to read all the way through.
That is a complicated book.
Too complex for me. Okay. And similarly, a number of the banking sites, when the banking industry ran our text through this, they found equivalent to Nietzsche. And again, Nietzsche's an achievement. So the point here actually is, what are we giving up when we can't read the text to explain what it is that we're giving up? And I think part of what we want to try and understand is how people might make use of that data in a big data world, and how we might try and understand what we're giving up and what we're agreeing to.
Professor, these are important deals that are being done, though. These are complicated concepts involving money and copyright and licensing of products. I mean, these can't be the cat sat on the mat. Or are you suggesting they're deliberately hiding truth behind?
So I wouldn't want to suggest they're deliberately hiding truth. But to be honest, I think we're all being a bit too comfortable and a bit too lazy about what we're doing here. So, and I'd like us to change how we think about this before legislation has to happen to make people change these things.
From my watching of TV shows, yeah, I know that when someone signs a contract, if they don't know what they were signing, the contract can become null and void, can't it? If you just clicked it after 1.5 seconds, you haven't really made an informed decision.
Indeed, and actually, legally, whether they're even enforceable in the UK is actually interesting. So most of this stuff is copy and paste from the Midwest legally. However, there is a notion of normal expectancy and what's normally expected and normally sort of trusted. And a lot of what happens in those terms and conditions are principally about the second order rights. Okay, by which I mean, you sign with a company, for example, one of your utility suppliers, and within the terms and conditions, you'll find that they will have the rights to release your data in particular ways. So they will have, so for example, one of the terms and conditions that I read recently has rights to supply to any of their families or to sell the records of your bills, your bill payments, and any additional notes that they may have made about you. Okay, so that therefore means that there's a kind of release of information out there that you don't know of or can't control. Okay.
Does this scare you?
Yes, yes. As it should.
All right, before we...
Well, it does me, and I think therein lies actually the real issue. It scares me because I've got lots of training to understand what the digital does and how the digital is analysed. My research is actually about people don't have that risk perception. Actually, what's interesting in terms of the legislation framework that exists at present is we're undergoing a shift. We're undergoing a shift from the emphasis being and responsibilities for these things lying with us to them lying with the data handlers, to lying with big business. Visa at one point, and this has been contended, but at one point claimed an algorithm which would, with a shared credit history of 2 individuals who were a couple, and be able to predict divorce within 2 years, often before the individuals themselves had an awareness of it.
Delete all your files, you run this algorithm to rewrite all the file contents and erase them, and lo and behold, all the contents is still there.